first, I want to talk about, I guess, the difference between, older generations and younger generations. This is not really related to the health stuff, but we'll come back to that. I just want a bit of a break from talking about it. Um, I was in a Twitter space, just listening, to a Twitter space the other day. There were, I think, a variety of ages, but mostly older. So older millennials, and boomers in that who were speaking. And there was like maybe one Zoomer, Gen Z person who was there. And, you know, it was quite rare to hear from a Gen Zer on Twitter who shared, similar values to myself or those other people in the group who are more like conservative leaning. Because in Australia, it's very difficult to find conservative people, like actually conservative people. The Overton window, like I said last time, is shifted very left here. Um, Anyways, so these old people really were like older people. Sorry, I shouldn't say old people. They weren't that old. They weren't like, geriatric, senile, dementia-ridden people. Um, Older people. They were very curious to hear from this Gen Z guy, and of course I was as well. But I've, heard similar stuff because I'm younger than some of those people who were talking, and so I'm more familiar with some of the sentiment that was shared. Anyways, yeah, they were asking like, oh, what he thought about the culture, how did it become like that, and what they're teaching in schools and what happened, and how can parents stop, you know, what's going on and try to prevent, you know, the destruction of kids in the education system or in, society, the cultural problems that we're facing right now, right? And I thought it was really interesting that I guess the underlying thought is that these problems just came out of a vacuum, right? Nothing comes out of a vacuum. These problems didn't just appear overnight, and you're like, one minute your kid is a normal kid, and then the next he's a full-blown communist. That doesn't happen. You got to look at the reasons for why people become the way they do, try to understand where people are coming from and how they got there. Um, I think we really need to reconcile the generations. We need to bridge the gap between the boomers and the younger people and the zoomers. Boomers and zoomers, just more catchy to say it that way. Um, because if, yes, we could blame every past generation for a problem. Say, oh, my parents didn't give me this or didn't give me that, and therefore I have those problems. And then young people can criticize the old people can criticize their kids, like, oh, you're so entitled, and you guys don't work hard enough. Stop eating avocado on toast, then you will be able to own a house. Just ignore the fact that their house prices are 14 times higher, and they used to be only like 3 times worth your wage, not 10, 14 times. Anyways, um, I think that the boomers don't, or the older people don't really seem to grasp that their actions cause this, So many of, my parents' generation, they they let their kids go into these schools, go into public schools, these universities that have been completely taken over, by ideologues. I was in university and it was super crazy. All the people who were teachers were like, yikes, they were very left leaning, most of them. I used to be left leaning when I was in uni and school because of the indoctrination. You're conditioned into thinking a certain way. And if you dare to stray from it, you'll get called all sorts of names, maybe even punished academically. Um, yeah, I think a lot of parents kind of checked out. They let their kids be raised by who knows, what kind of teachers. These just randoms, in public school and private school. They're not being really vetted very well by their parents. And the parents, because, both parents are working, um, it they don't have time to teach their kids because they're both working, which I understand. If you're financially in a difficult, spot, then you might be forced to have to work. Now, you might not be able to stay home and raise your kids or teach your kids, right? To homeschool. But because there was such a big, like, checking out of the older generation of what their kids were actually learning, and not really paying attention to what's happening in uni. Like, sometimes I talk to older people about what happened, my own uni experience, and that was a while ago. I haven't been in uni even in a long time. Um, and they're shocked at the stuff that some of the teachers said to me, or the stuff that was expressed in the class, and they just didn't know that was even happening. And it's worse now, right? um so I think boomers need to, take responsibility for the part they played. You fed your kids to the lions. You put them in the lion's den. Or another analogy, you gave your kids up to Caesar and you're surprised that they turned out to be Romans, right? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And then the Zoomers, like, I can see there's a lot of anger and disappointment with the system, that they've been lied to, they've been sold a bag of lies. Now that they're working and things are getting worse, the inflation and everything, and having a normal life feels out of reach for so many of them. I totally can empathize. Like, I'm in the same boat as well. It feels like you're getting punished even though you did all the right things. You studied, you went to uni, you got a good paying job, and it's not enough. You can't even afford a home, right? To raise a family on one income, which previous generations could do. And now things are just like so crazy with the housing prices. Like, I think Zoomers also need to think carefully about where they're directing their anger. Yes, our parents, generation and stuff, they do a lot of things that, really were destructive, to the social fabric. And I'm sure the generation before them had some flaws as well. But it's kind of, accumulating a lot of these bad things. Um, we need to think more clearly about what is causing those problems. It's not just like, oh, the rich people. Like, it's a very broad, very vague way of generalizing things. Or the old people, right? It's government policies propping up things like the real estate market, um, you know, high immigration rates, which is a government thing. And a lot of those things are, you know, a lot of them are companies that are, uh, what do you call it? Companies who are collaborating, or like lobbying, sorry, lobbying the government, had a brain fart there, to, do things that they want. And they have a lot of power because they make a lot of money. So you can't blame the, older generation for all the problems, but they do have a big responsibility because, a lot of them made those companies or worked there, and contributed to the problem. We also have to remember, that the government doesn't really have our best interests in heart. And they're also trying to scapegoat, for example, landlords. I see a lot of media articles doing that. And I think that's super dodgy because you're demonizing people just because they own property. That's a very dangerous way to go if you look at the history, in Soviet and communist countries, what they did, how they turned the hearts of people against certain groups. It's the same kind of language, and it's just history repeating itself. When really the government is the one who's like causing the problem, and they don't care. They just you know, we're just trying to rewrite things and rephrase things. It's like a marketed thing for them. Yeah, so I think we really need to bridge the gap and come together as people to find solutions, because if we don't, we're in a very dangerous place, right?